My name is Julie Pearson Little Thunder. Today is Wednesday, April 13th, and I'm interviewing Tom Fields for the Oklahoma Native Artist Project, sponsored by the Oklahoma Oral Histories Research Program at Oklahoma State University. We're in Stillwater at Tom's home, not far from campus. Tom, you're Muskogee and Cherokee, a photojournalist and a video producer, but you've also done fine art photography for many, many years. Mm-hmm. Where were you born and where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in W.W. Hastings Hospital in Tahlequah, Oklahoma in 1951, and sort of grew up all over eastern Oklahoma. My father was a minister, so wherever he went, of course, I was there. But lived in Kansas, Oklahoma, lived in Grove, Oklahoma, lived in Quapaw, Oklahoma, lived in Baxter Springs, Kansas, which is across the border of Quapaw. So, you know, just eastern Oklahoma, more or less.
Right. What are your earliest memories of doing art?
Doing
of
art.
any kind?
Probably just making little houses, clubhouses for the little cowboys and Indians. as my Indians would attack the cowboys. Actually, probably in my field of photography, I used to my dad actually had a little Instamatic camera, so that's kind of actually when I started. You know, when I think back. Of course, back in those days, in his church, he would have slideshows, right? So that was always kind of fun, you know, for me as a kid. So
to see the slideshows.
Yeah. So turn the lights off and watch, the shots. Actually, that's kind of where my interest in photography started.
That's How old were you? How old were you then?
Oh boy, I don't really know. Probably in elementary school somewhere, and then just kind of still had that interest. And then,
so you'd borrow your dad's, would he let you use that Instamatic?
Well, yeah, occasionally, yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was just a little Instamatic, so. But that was my earliest memory of shooting a photograph and actually seeing it, the results.
Right. So at some point, when you were you attended Quapaw High School. Mm-hmm. Did you take any art classes there?
I guess you could call them art classes. I really don't know. It was a real little school. There were only like 30 students in my grade. So, it was probably your typical small town school, football.
Right.
Art really wasn't a part of it, but we managed, I think, to do things. We had a teacher who was real, with it at that time, so we did some things, but I really don't have a memory of doing art in
elementary
school.
Or high school.
Yeah, I didn't, my background really isn't, I grew up doing that kind of thing. It was something probably I came to later on, in high school and that kind of thing.
After high school, what was your next move? What did you?
Actually, I went to California as soon as I graduated. Sort of got involved in different activities, Indian youth activities, those kind of things, and
there in California.
In California, like with the National Indian Youth Council, that group there. Then on into in Los Angeles for a while, stayed there right after I graduated. So. Got involved in that.
I saw that you were a student at UCLA in 1969.
Yeah, that sort of evolved out of a Clyde Warrior Institute,
okay,
which was part of the National Youth Council back in that era. They had got this big grant, to do workshops. I think one in Boulder, Colorado, one I think at Stout State in Minnesota, and one at University of California, and So there was there were several of us Oklahoma people that were out at the UCLA one, but it was it was
Any
a summer
other
workshop.
photographers?
Not really. A lot of when I probably started, I was more into probably drawing at that time, like pencil drawing, graphite, and that's kind of what I was always a good. I could always draw pretty good, and in fact, kind of triggered a memory here of I would always draw these cartoons in high school, and that's what got me kind of in trouble a lot of time. Kind of caricature, almost like political cartoons, principal or the teacher or scenarios.
Right.
Yeah, so that I did do that kind of thing.
So that poli-science major that you were going to start at UCLA, that was not just something you thought about. You were pretty serious about politics at that point. You were.
Well, I think as serious as probably an 18-year-old can get. And simply, it was 1969, 1970 in California. There was a lot of things going on, as you could say. So, and of course, I was right in the middle of it. But it was interesting because, as I think back on it, it was a time when a lot of Indian students were just kind of getting involved in their understanding who they were. And in California, it's kind of another game out there, but a lot of Paiutes, a lot of Mission Indians, a lot of relocated second, third generation Oklahoma Indians out there, a lot of Athabascan and Inuit Indians. In fact, my best friend at that time was an Inuit, almost said Eskimo, I mean Inuit. But he's actually the one who recruited me to continue at UCLA. We were there leasing like a fraternity house. The Clyde Ward Institute leased a big house. That's kind of where everyone stayed. And actually it was one that was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, so it was really a fancy, artistic kind of place, you might say. But it was during that era that I got recruited because they were trying to build their program, Indian program, so they were looking for students to be there. So that's how I ended up sort of there, from that to there.
So in Alcatraz was happening, and were you using a camera?
I was using pencil and pad. I wish I did have a camera at that era. I hadn't really got the camera at that moment. I was looking back on an old sketchbook I had, and I'm not sure where it's at now, but Joe Bill is an Inuit guy, and there's this lighthouse behind him. I kind of sketched him at one time. Yeah, I was. We went out there. That was kind of an evolution. That action that happened at Alcatraz. The people out there had did it. I think a year before, just as a symbolic thing, and I think they did it even about a month before that. And Richard Oakes and all of them connected sort of with all these college students, because at that particular time, a lot of Indian college students from these different campuses up and down California, from Berkeley to UC Santa Cruz to San Diego State, Long Beach State, UCLA, a lot of those Indian studies programs and Indian student associations, we were having conferences, and so it just kind of evolved into this activity in November to sort of an action, and so that's what happened. We had Actually, we checked out a university car. I remember there were Chevrolet station wagons. And I forget how many we had, but that's how we ended up in San Francisco. Ended up in Sausalito. Everyone took the boat over then to Alcatraz. And that's kind of where that's how that particular first discovery happened, was right then, that particular night. Because at that point it stayed occupied until the end, whatever, I think it was a few years later. Went through a whole lot of groups, the students had it for, I'm not sure how long, maybe a short term compared to how it evolved, over the time that it had. So,
where did you head after California?
Actually, I came back home.
Okay.
Came back to Oklahoma, and got involved at Oklahoma University, and that's kind of still tried to.
Oklahoma State or OCU? Oh, OU,
Yeah, I was in
Oklahoma, okay.
Yeah.
Norton.
Got recruited by someone else to hang out, to be there at OU, go to school there. So that's kind of how I stopped here, I guess, was doing that, was being part of the program that they had. At that particular time, there was a lot of new programs, Indian student programs that were sort of beginning stages. And so that's what a lot of it was, and so they were always looking for Indian students.
Did you take any photography classes?
I hadn't got totally photography yet.
Okay.
I was there and was still involved in more or less political science class, sociology classes, things of that nature. But it was after that, that I really started getting involved in photography. Realized I probably. There was a lot of things going on, and I'm sure there's some gaps in there, but that's, when I finally did get a camera, then it became part of, documenting in a way where I was, who I was around,
mm-hmm.
because I found it real interesting, the kind of the people. I wish I'd picked it up even sooner, I wish I'd picked it up in the late 60s and 70s, because even what I have now is historical in the sense that a lot of the people that I was around and could have photographed or have since then, have passed away or certainly changed. 50 years is almost like it's another world basically. Back then. So
exactly. Do you remember how you got your first camera, or where you got it, what kind it was?
I think probably the first time that really took me to still photography was I had back in the 70s. I got involved in a documentation project, a video documentation project. This was back in about 76, I think, and. Actually was working, I think, in a program with the Osages back in the old Title IV days, and documenting, back in the old days, video days, and I got involved with a project that was out of DC, and the whole premise of that was, okay, a lot of tribes have all this equipment that were bought. We're going to bring you up here. We're going to train you. We're going to send you back out to the tribal hinterlands. And you're going to use their equipment, you're going to videotape whatever, an event, document, whatever. And then we'll bring it all back up here and edit it and archive it. So that was the basic premise of it. So we did a lot of that, did some of that. And that's kind of where I got involved in sort of videotaping pretty heavily, and enjoyed, the use of the camera and kind of what it can do, and the editing process and that. So that's kind of how I got into that.
Had you met Anita yet, or?
Not at that time, no. Probably the next stage, though, out of that, and I bring this up because I got involved in Santa Fe to a community workshop council was a film group. And again, it was another sort of that era when there were large projects going on. And there was another one in Appalachia, and then the Indians had one. I think the blacks had a project. I'm not sure exactly where. I even think the Asians had a project. So the one in Santa Fe was sort of the one I got involved in. But actually during that time, I was friends with a guy named Milo Yellowhair. And he had I forget where he was working before, but he had, he might have been there at IIA, because that's kind of where we housed out of the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. We just sort of leased a building there.
During that project? During
that project, leased a building there. We weren't actually students of the Institute of American Indian Arts. We were, anyway, it was during that time. I think Milo had processed some film, and I was hanging out with him, and was printing, making a print, running it through the chemicals developer stuff after that. That was the first time I'd really been around printing photographs, was then, and I was just intrigued, as kind of as I went through the process, blank paper, expose it to the negative light and on and on. So, after that, I sort of really became more involved in shooting and printing, my own. And that's kind of where the really beginning stages of my, I guess, real interest in using photography and making printing and all that. So.
Did you sort of just kind of watch what he was doing and experiment?
More or less, because I wasn't a student there. I wasn't in a
Right.
photography class at that time. It was just, we were just kind of doing it. And in fact, we were in a film project. It wasn't even a still photography thing.
Right.
We were just doing it because we'd shot this film, or he had shot this film. So then I started doing that. Then I acquired a camera, a Pentax 35mm camera, and started, from that point on, to using it and buying film and shooting and that kind of thing. So,
In 1978, you were enrolled as an art major at Northeastern, I guess. And at that point, photography really was your focus.
Yeah, I got involved in that, and also got involved in going to a photography school. Let's say, I think probably I got involved in art class, yes. And then I got involved in. Funny thing about schools and universities for me was, I guess I was so uninterested maybe, or focused in other areas that it just didn't work out well for me. So I would go and enroll and go to school and do the work, but it just wasn't my thing. So I actually, after that, went to a specific little school in Tulsa that this photographer ran. That sort of worked better for me because I could, it was just strictly photography, about lighting and the technology behind doing photograph. And he was a portrait photographer, so he had a studio and he did a lot of work, mostly portraits. So that was interesting for me and something that I really needed to learn about, lighting and all that kind of thing, because it's about lighting.
Who was it?
I was a photographer there. I think his name was, I can't think of his first name, but he had a little school there called Chirac School of Photography. Mm-hmm. He just ran it out of his house, but had just maybe 4 or 5 students, something like that. It was more, which was good, because it was one-on-one with this guy.
Right.
I think he was from New York originally, he lived down there, but he knew his stuff, he knew his business, and that's, for me, that's what I wanted to know. That's what I needed to hear and learn. So.
Were you exposed to the works of any other photographers or while you were at NSU or elsewhere? Did you see any shows by photographers that made an impression on you?
Well, probably the impressions were made even earlier as I look back also, and one of them was, of course, Life magazine, the black and white photography that Life magazine used to do. And one of my favorites were Eugene Smith, who was a Life photographer back in that era. And I think some of the photographs that really struck me was the one he did of documenting the chemical pollution in Japan at this village called Minamata, and how the birth defects, the kids that were being born. And he has this picture of this mother in this bath, and the lighting was almost coming through the top, holding her son, who's really deformed. He was born deformed, and that picture just had a lot of power. And the way he printed it also was these real vivid blacks and these lights, because black and white is a tonality thing, and how you control that, or it controls maybe how people respond to it a lot of times. So that right there, I really started looking at his work and wanted sort of that technique, that style, that emotion that he did. That's kind of what I liked also. So looking at Life magazine back in that era, that was kind of what I guess got my interest also. Was that. He also did a photograph I remember that was sort of turned into calendars. It was these two. His kids actually were holding hands, walking out of, looks like the way he printed it, this dark forest, and they're in the light. They're real little, and I've seen it reproduced as calendars, illustration calendars. And I remember my grandmother having it on a calendar with that illustration on her wall in her room. And so, you know, that I always remember looking at it. And then when I saw the photograph, I realized, well, that probably was either inspired by that or that was inspired by that, one of the two. But that was another photograph that I really liked that he did, and the way he printed it. He's done a lot of other things, but that was one of the most intriguing. The other one for me was Mary Ellen Mark, a New York photographer, and I did take some workshops under her, met her, and, you know, got critiqued by her and things of that, because her style is black and white, but her photographs, and she says, you know, she photographs the fringes of society, the subcultures, and she did this piece on the prostitutes of India. You know, that's very serious work when you get into places like that. She did these pieces on the children at a mental hospital in Oregon. She did some pieces on the runaways in Seattle. In fact, she did a film with her husband on that. But all these are very real powerful kind of photographs, and they're really sort of documentary type photographs where they're a whole story, but they're a series of almost like, to me, I call them like freeze frames, because the thread is just kind of moving through. You're just looking maybe at images that were taken, but she had a real knack for me. Every time I'd look at one of her pictures, it was like, wow, how did she get that? I mean, you know, it was, to me, as I'm, you know, when I'm trying to learn, and that's the only way you really learn, I think, in photography is doing and studying, you know, and looking at her work. It really challenged me to, how did she get that, you know? And that's what I had to answer and resolve. And then certainly when I met her, you know, she was she was an interesting person. You know, she was a New Yorker, so she was really high energy, kind of a fast talking, you know, fast eating type of a photographer. And I can kind of see how she got that, because she was very out there, you know. So you do have to have a bit of I guess, not attitude, but, you know, drive when you do some things, because if you don't, you may not get what you were after. So there's that little element that I always kind of try to have.
Right. And that workshop was approximately late 70s?
Probably, no, actually that was a little later. I mean,
Okay.
I'd studied her work before, but I think it was probably in the 90s even.
In the
you know?
90s,
yeah.
okay, yeah.
But I'd seen her work for years and years, and
Yeah.
I'd studied it. And
Right.
actually, she was at the Arts Quartz Mountain at an adult workshop, you know, back
Okay.
in that era, back when they had funding, you know, could
Right.
bring in these
Right.
really high level people. And I couldn't believe that she was going to be here, but she does a lot of other workshops, and I would really like to take some under her.
Yeah.
She does really good critiques, because she looks at work and will tell you what your strengths are, and then she'll look at you like, well, why are you doing this? You know, like, you know, which is, and when my first critique, I thought you had to have all these things, you know, landscape, this, and this, to be a complete photographer, you know. And she looked at my work and told me what my strengths were, and asked me why I was doing this, and I don't know, you know. But I mean, you know, that's what you need. You have someone to really.
So was she kind of talking about subject matter at that point?
Oh, in a
or-
way, I think I was trying to do like just general landscapes, you know, outside landscapes, nice. And, you know, I think those have value and things for a place, depending on what you're doing. But that definitely wasn't my strength, you know. I mean, there's a lot of people who really can do it well. She liked the work I did with people, you know, being able to sort of even document, you know, or photograph within communities and people, and that's what she liked. And
She
responded to it and
recognized
told
that
me,
strength
yeah,
there.
do more of this, you know.
Yes.
So that's what you need to do, you know. Don't be messing, wasting your time with this, you know. So you know, I took that to heart and did that.
You entered the Philbrook Art Show at one point, and your photographs were the first art photographs to be accepted into the show. Do you remember who the judges were that year? I'm wondering if that was sort of a battle that they fought.
You know, I don't even know, but that actually was in the era that I was at Chirac School in Tulsa, that particular era, and we decided, or I decided, yeah, I'd like to enter this. I knew that show was coming up. I'd been there before, you know, seen artwork and stuff. And I thought, well, heck, I'll submit a photograph and see what they do. There was no category, really. I mean, there was no yes or no, you know.
Yes.
No, you can't, or, well, here's a category. So it just kind of got in like that because no one would say, well, it didn't say we can't. So it went in under graphics. And the picture I actually shot was of Nietzsche Gray, who was an Elder Creek man. A friend of mine was his grandson, Joe Sulphur. And so we brought him in, and we had him in his stickball outfit. And I was using the lights, you know, of the studio. And so shot some, you know, scenes there. Shot a whole lot of different scenes. And what the one I ended up using was, I sort of did a triple exposure, one with him, and actually the one with his other grandson, Danny McKinney. And they were both in their stickball, which was basically just a felt red tie and then a breechcloth holding the sticks. And then there was another young boy. So it was like 3 different generations. So that was sort of one we conceived, and then we had to shoot it in camera, you know, like adjust the shutter, but don't move the film, so you get triple exposures on it. So that's kind of the one we used, or the one I used and submitted it. So they couldn't deny it.
Did they, who has that photograph now? Did the Philbrook?
Actually, Shelley bought it.
Oh, okay. Well,
so and you know, the technology, I think probably, I hope it even still has color in it, you know, because it just it was like in the 70s, you know. How long ago was that? 30 years ago. And I have the negative, or I need to probably reprint it again and try to bring it back to life. But the point of that was, you know, of trying to put something different in that category, and I wasn't trying really to put myself in the Indian art world. You know, it just wasn't there. I said, well, let's do this. You know, let's put it there. At the time, there wasn't any photography category anywhere.
Right.
Where we actually tried to open a door was during Indian Market in Santa Fe, because there were about 3 photographers when we first started said, you know, you guys need to have a category, because we'd bring it in, but there would be no category. There would be nothing where like in a competition part of it. So that door kind of opened, and then there's a whole story to this, by the way, but anyway, that was kind of how that evolved. Just people who do the work, you know, asking, hey, you know, you guys should have a category and do this. Well, now you look at it and there's a whole pretty good category. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not, depending on who the judges are, depending on who people contribute, because it is still just a distinct group of artists, really.
Relatively small group.
Yeah, it's not representative to me of the whole thing, because not everybody goes to Santa Fe, not everybody wants to enter the competition, and certainly photographers, a lot of them don't have the resources or the money to do a lot of that are out in the hinterlands. But at least it provided an outlet, and you know, there's just like any painting or anything, there's a lot of variables, a lot of variety, a lot of styles, a lot of different things. So it's been kind of interesting to see, you know, what evolved out of that. So.
Right, and we had discussed a bit the fact that there weren't, you know, setting up. You did at different times set up, I guess, at arts and crafts shows with your photographs at different Indian art shows. And what were some of the challenges you encountered?
I think starting out, you know, one thinks that they have to do art shows and sales and things like that. And I did a few, but the type of work I do, where you're photographing individuals in a community and stuff, it really doesn't lend itself to a marketable kind of market type situation, you know, where, okay, I have this picture of so-and-so and, you know, doing this, and I want you to put that on your wall, you know, and I'll sell it to you for X amount of dollars. Another side of that is, even though people know I took their picture, Indians can get very jealous if they think you're making $1 you know, from them or something, even though you're not. You've probably spent 30 and maybe to make 10, you know. So that kind of was a headache, you know, that I didn't want to get into. So I, you know, and I have done, depending, I did Indian Market in Santa Fe, and I did that in the early years again to get that category open, but I haven't done it lately, you know, because
I was wondering.
it just isn't something that that I enjoy. You know, I don't really love that market atmosphere. The work I do, actually, I like to do projects for specific either publications or exhibits or shows where the whole story can be, you know, sort of looked at or understood and told.
By means of a series.
Yeah, a series. Certainly there are serious collectors out there, and I've had sold to people who certainly understand photography and have some things, but just that market process was just something that I did not like. And, you know, the old thing is, you know, if you don't like it, don't do it. You know,
Right.
Why do that if you, at the end of the day, you're all tight thinking, oh, you know, dang, you know, people, you know. And so I think the thing that put it over the line for me was almost having to coming to blows with these people in the next booth, these tourists, because they were all crowding into our booth, and, you know, it's just like, man.
This is
What am I? Why tolerate and put up with this stuff? You know, when I don't have to. I don't have to do that. For some reason, I did it. I just thought, man. So I don't think I went to Santa Fe next year, the year after that. So I just wasn't interested.
Right.
So.
When and where did you meet your wife, Anita?
Let's see. First time I met her actually was in Denver. I was working at a TV station up there back in, I don't remember the year. But anyway, I was working there, and I knew her cousin, and went to a party, and, you know, she was there, and I think it was like clear across, almost into Boulder, and I was living like almost downtown Denver. So I had to get back for some reason, and so she drove me back. So that was kind of the first time I met her. Then I actually met her again in Santa Fe. She went to school at the Institute of American Indian Arts. So I met her there again. So that's kind of where. When I was I was living in Albuquerque. No, actually, this was a different time. You know, okay. Different era even. I actually a little later on after that in the 70s, probably the later 70s, or maybe 75 and 74, I think. I was in Albuquerque working. I was with some other friends of mine who were in a band called Exit, and so I would help them with their equipment and, you know, lighting and various things, and do some photography for them, and then would always go to Santa Fe a lot because I knew a lot of people up there, and so I think that's when she was in Santa Fe going to school up there, and that's kind of where I met her up there during that period of time. Spent a lot of time in New Mexico, you know, really like New Mexico because it's a lot going on, you know, and so that's kind of why I ended up in New Mexico quite a bit.
You sort of explained the importance of workshops for you in terms of developing your skills. How were you aware of the work of some of the Indian photographers from like the 30s and 40s, like Horace Pula? Had you been exposed to their work very much when you started? You
know, it's interesting. I really didn't know about them, you know, that much. I don't think there was a lot of information that was out there publicly, you know, like there is now, you know. I had met one gentleman, a Seminole man, who used to be an Army photographer back in World War II. He was one of the few Indian photographers that I knew. But, you know, again, he was a photographer in terms of he knew the craft, but he wasn't doing, you know, the kind of things that I did, you know. So, you know, but I really didn't know that many Indian photographers. I mean, you know, the guys I hung around with shot a bit, but, you know, I didn't go or couldn't go to places and read about them or study about them or research them, because it was at that period of time in the 70s, there just wasn't a lot of people who were doing it as a commercial basis or were professionally doing it, you know, or putting shows out there. If there were, I didn't know about them. I think the more now that I research back, there were a few, maybe enough on one hand, maybe, you know, and now that you see what they've done. But it was pretty much just a new game for me that I was just doing, and, you know, looking at other photographers, of course, but not necessarily native photographers.
What was one of your more important group shows, one of your first sort of group photography shows that was real important to you?
Well, I think certainly, of course, that Philbrook Art Show,
Right.
you know, became one in the beginning. I guess it sort of opened the window, I guess, to people seeing that there are photographers out there, or a photographer, or photographers. And I certainly am not trying to claim any kind of credit for anything, other than just you know, I was doing that at that time and wanted sort of to just see what would happen if I'd enter a photograph. I actually thought it wasn't going to get in, you know. I was surprised when they let it in, but I've had several shows, you know, down the line. I think the one that had some at Smithsonian or at the American Indian Museum, Who Stole the TP, you know, that was one where you know, it's the one I've got hanging up back here, I think. That was part of that show. I'm trying to think of others right now.
We the People was one at the Oklahoma Art Center in 83.
Oh, right. Quite a while ago.
And did that connect you with a couple of other Indian photographers that you really
Sure, you know,
were working?
Yeah, the thing about photographers, we're sort of very independent individual types, you know. It's not like we all hang out and go have a drink together somewhere. You know, I don't know why, but mostly because we're all kind of that's a very individual art, and I think when you're out there doing it, you're internally kind of working, you know, in your brain and physically. So, you know, it's kind of funny when you think about it. But yeah, you know, I'm able to meet a few people there.
In the mid-'80s, Anita decided she was going to take the plunge into doing art full-time, and that's always a discussion between partners because of the financial uncertainty that it brings. How did you guys work that out?
Well, I think probably I started working a little, you know, in different jobs at the particular time, you know, because you had to pay rent, had to pay car payments and all that. So I managed actually to find jobs, and it was intentional that I find jobs where I had access to a darkroom, for one, and equipment. So I managed to sort of plot my career path and was able to manage to find some work in an area where I had access to all that. So for me, it wasn't like I was working in a factory, you know, and so it wasn't that mentally that hard to you know, to stay there, let's say. But I also knew that, you know, I needed to sort of keep a paycheck because, you know, we started to have kids, you know, in '76 our first daughter was born. So, you know, that meant, you know, we needed to get serious and, you know, and start a family and start, you know, doing things that you do like that. So, you know, I just decided, well, I'll continue working, you know, as long as I can and have access to this. So that's what really allowed me to work, I guess, was because I was doing work that I enjoyed, either photography or video or, you know, that kind of thing. So that's what we did. We decided that I would, you know, I'll just keep a job, continue working. But
and you were like developing your technical skills, but at the same time, like you said, you had access to doing the resources to do the fine art photography on the side.
And you know, that's a decision that we made there. But you know, I do know that it affects me as what I do. You know, as I look back at some of the work I did back then, I really feel I had a better eye, I guess you might say, and it probably a better reaction time. But you know, a lot of things you shoot for work in the commercial market is that's what that is, and you have to know how to shift gears to when you're doing your own work. A lot of strategies or techniques can be sort of interworked photographically, but you have to be very aware of your intents and how it's going to be used. Technically, certainly you're doing the same thing, you know, but the other part of it is, I think the issue that I have with working and trying, because it's like I had a freelance business, you know, because photography, you can do that. And it allowed me to do that, and I did that and still did that. That's how I maintained all my shows and stuff while having, let's say, an 8 to 5. But it does affect. Now, no one else may not see that effect, but I know that it had an effect. And the effect was, if I had devoted full time to this, where would I have been, you know, in that photography realm? Mm-hmm. I think I'd have been a lot further up or more body of work. But, you know, that's just a lot of trade-offs. There's a lot of ifs, you know, when you're living your life, and you can't always look back on that ifs. I just sort of was looking at it maybe from in a way, a technical kind of perspective, and saying, man, I wish I would have or could have did a little more to evolve sort of this craft a little better. Right. So, you know, that's just,
I hope that will,
the way it works sometimes.
Time will come again here in the future. You talk about the importance in your work of having a kind of metaphoric ground, and I wonder if you could explain that, what you mean by that, when you're photographing American Indian subject matter.
Well, you know, I think any artwork or any document or anything you have, poetry, writing, you know, you sort of use metaphors to imply things, you know, or to associate things with. And when I photograph place, almost like a landscape, or people, I call it peoplescapes in a way, humanscapes, human landscapes. And I did exhibits and processes where it's kind of a takeoff on what people call landscapes, you know, and you just see ground, or you'll see a place, which is good. But for me, it's the people that are on there. It's the people who live there. It's the people whose identity is based out of there. I mean, you can take an Indian to Europe, and eventually he'll wind up back to the same ground that he sort of started and was born or lived at, because that's kind of what pulls him back. That's his community. So in that respect, that's kind of what that was about. It was my statement about trying to understand what that is, what's in the Indian psyche. And the reason I really felt I needed to do that, understand it, as a photographer, that is, or an artist, that is kind of what you're doing. You are always presenting either an image, and that's what a photograph is. It's a still image, or it's either a piece of paper or whatever, you know, but it captures a moment in time, and that time to me is sort of a continuing process. So for me to capture a highlight, you might say, or something that I wanted to show, I had to sort of understand a lot of that. A good example, I had to shoot a ropes course one time, and I didn't really know what I was doing, you know, so I decided, well, I want to be a ropes course instructor to understand it. I did that, and it helped me understand and get my work. It's kind of that realm where, to understand what you're photographing, in some respects, you really have to immerse yourself into whatever you're doing. Now, the Indian world, I grew up in it, you know, so I understood parts of that, but it's so vast and so big and complex, and, you know, all these different tribes and different communities, you can't just generalize everything. So one has to sort of go place to place, or ground to ground, you know, and that's kind of what that metaphor was all about, sort of coming out of a landscape photographer to the human landscape, you know. This is what it is. This is us, this is people, this is, you know, where we are, this is where we live, you know, this is how we live. And the photographs are just a way, I think as a photographer, there's one job that I have. If there was a job description, it would be to show people a whole new perspective of whatever it is I'm shooting. People, place, animals, you know, just give them a new perspective, something that, you know, they've never seen before. And that could be just perspective and how you put your camera. Camera's only a metal object, you know. It's how you see it, or the time of day. If you look at, let's say the reality is this core here, you have this sphere, you might say, where you could put a camera, and then within that even time of day. So the mathematical variables of what you could actually push that shutter at, are just, they're pretty high. So that's the options one has, and so that's kind of what it's all about when I talk about that.
And I think that ties into what you also wrote about on your resume, which is sort of this idea that, if you're just shooting for non-Indians, if these moments of ceremony or a dance or whatever, a powwow, that's very dramatic and it's very compelling, and those are the images that people like to see. And yet, if you don't get those quiet everyday moments, which are like 99%, 99.9% of life, you're kind of missing the whole picture.
For me, it is. I'm trying to think if I ever shot for. I really don't. When I shoot a picture, it's for myself. Always, even though I may get a paycheck from somebody else, so I don't cross a line of I'm not a hired gun, let's say, by a non-Indian to go into an Indian community to pull something out. I wouldn't shoot anything that I wouldn't shoot personally, because actually a photographer, he has his craft, his skill, his abilities, and also your reputation. And the key to getting a type of photograph in a community with people is that trust. If you break a trust, they're not going to let you in. And you can't get that photo. Yeah, you can get a photograph. I can stand over here and shoot this and this and this. It's just going to look like another Oklahoma tourism shot to me. And I wouldn't be satisfied. I would leave. But again, that's a part of my angle, my uniqueness, the way I see my job, I see my craft, is to always have that core value, I guess, of doing that. Now, this is not something that I read aloud or carry a card with me, but over the years, it's something that I really stick with, because, I've made mistakes, in the early years of my career, doing things when I was really learning and trying to figure out, how and why this works or why that doesn't work, and how to work, within communities. And it's never easy. There's never anything easy. Just like the other day, I was at a wild onion dinner, at a church way out in the sticks out there, and I could have stayed in the hall and took pictures of that, but I didn't want to. I went to a camp house, stayed there, and then started shooting from there. Got my I had my camera with me, because I'm never somewhere. I want people to know that yes, I'm a photographer. I'm not trying to clandestinely come in here and snap something that behind your back. And so I'll always have it, and that's why I have it on me. So it's obvious. But then I start shooting when people are comfortable and I talk to them and they know what's going on. And then that's when I say photography can begin. And then that's kind of where, in a way, the story begins for me. And my stories that I interpret or try to share with people, let's say, about this moment. And let me just say a little bit about that. The moment for me in Indian communities, to me, are so powerful and precious. And so this is why I think that drive for me to really try to get at that core. Now, this all sounds kind of crazy, but if you're not a photographer and you don't understand, kind of what you're doing, but one has to give themselves a job. One has to tell them the parameters of it, a job description, and then you have to the best of your ability, go do that. And so that's it's kind of second nature to me now after doing it for 40 years, and evolved it, so I'm able to actually grab a camera and go out and have all this with me hanging there. No one sees it, but there's a method to what I'm doing. It's not just usually. Again, I separate it out if that's what I'm doing, that's what I do. It carries all of that with me. If I'm just shooting snapshots, that's what I do also, because it is just a camera. But that allows me then to tell the bigger story, to get the people who are part of that story, because the native story or the native narrative is a thread. It isn't just bump, 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 bump. And that's kind of why I like projects. You're telling a story. You're telling the part where people are preparing or cooking or eating or talking or sharing, all these elements that are part of who we are as a people. And so that once I'll shoot till I think, wow, I'm spent, physically spent, and then almost emotionally, because I feel that, okay, I've got something here, and so I feel, good about that, and then that's when I'll call it, cut, go cut, we've got what we're doing.
Tell me about your project photographing Creek churches, documenting. Who initiated the project?
Well, it was one of those projects that's kind of I've been wanting to do for years. It was all self-funded, by me, and the main reason is because I wanted total control of it. I did get some funding for framing at the very end, but that was for that part of it. Like I said earlier, I sort of grew up in churches in that part of it when I was younger, and so as I got older, in my photographic career, I always wanted sort of to do a project about that. And in a way, it's kind of like a writer's novel, you always got that little novel or whatever in you to write about. Now, one thing I do want to make real clear, I'm not a historian. I'm not, a writer. I'm a photographer. So that's what I do. And it can get very confusing out there sometimes when you're out doing projects in communities. But you do, one thing I do on my photographs, I always sort of get the facts of what I'm doing, where I'm at. And part of that is, so it's almost like a historical document. And that's what this project was about, it was to document the Creek churches, but it was from it was from the perspective of not what Christianity did to the Creeks, but how Creeks adapted it to their own needs. And just that by itself is quite a bit, but the history of it, is pretty big. And it's the history of this country. It's the history of the removal process. A lot of churches that were there were established in the 1870s, 1840s and 50s. Some of them, or in the early part, there were some that were. The Creeks had interaction with missionaries back in the early 1700s, and there were some that were on their side, the Presbyterians, for example. So to me, it provided a vehicle of history, but more than that, I wanted to show the people. I'm a photographer. I can't photograph, let's say, 1870 today, but I can photograph the people, the descendants of people from 1870, and why they do what they do in their ceremonies. A lot of things, I think, growing up, there was a dichotomy of in our tribe, you're a Christian, you're a traditional stomp dance leader. And I think that was something that was perpetrated by white missionaries a lot, ultimately we all probably have the same God, the same creator. And in fact, in the traditional world, the concept of the creator or giver of life, giver of breath, was something that the Creek people could understand when they talked about Christ over here on this side, as opposed to Hisagati Mazi on this side. So there was that element, but I think there was also an element of culture being destroyed at that time during that period of removal, where one didn't know if they were going to even survive the day, more or less. So I think all human beings have a need to feel comfort, safety, and I think Creek people certainly had a understanding of the Creator and praying. And that's what this project was. It was about praying people, but I took it and wanted to show the people who are part of this community today. When I started shooting it, I think there's just so many elements there that are historical, are powerful in terms of what they do, how they do it, and why they do it. I think everyone in Oklahoma has heard Creek singing, church singing. I mean, it's just kind of integral to part of it. And so it was some of that, but I just wanted to show the people that were there. And, so I went to a lot of different churches and basically would just show up and tell them what I was doing. And, they're really involved in what they're doing, their day-to-day thing. And as long as I didn't interrupt pretty much, I remember one time I went to a church. The lady asked me what took me so long to get there. I'd never met her, but I understood what she was talking about, And so I was very well received. I don't really recall any negative part of that. But on the other side of that too, as a photographer, it was challenging. I always say as a photographer, you're probably 30% photographer and 80% a psychologist, diplomat, all the other elements, because I'm having to talk to people, that don't know me. The good thing about some of that was they did know my dad, some of them, so that was kind of an in. And I would also travel some places with another minister sometimes, several of them, that I knew, and they knew what I was doing, and I'd kind of hop along with them and wherever they were going, and would go to places. So that experience became sort of for me a way for me to understand it better, that history part, and I'm talking about Creeks who are full-bloods. They speak Creek in that church. They sing these hymns. Most of them are elders because a lot of young people are doing other things, and so it was interesting in that respect, and so this project was a way to photograph that. It was done over a period of several years, so to show people what this community is about, what they do, what it looks like on that day, what they look like, and so it was just a way to bring that piece of our Indian world, to the forefront and let people look at it.
Those are some wonderful pictures too, and we're going to look at them at the end of the interview. You have always pretty much worked in black and white. What do you like about black and white photography?
Well, I think photographers are kind of like ducks. Whatever we see first when we come out of the water, that becomes our mother. So that first image I saw being developed was a black and white image. But on the other hand of that, to me there's a real craft in printing a black and white picture. If you look at, when you see my photographs, back in the darkroom days, it could take me several hours, and I used to print at night, and would print all night. And it took me a lot of test strips and a lot of burning and dodging to getting that right tonality, because I like the blacks, I like the whites, to really bring that kind of contrast, that even that emotion that comes with it. And black and white, it certainly has to me more emotion. Color is great, but it has a different realm to it. Black and white, it just kind of speaks to me a little better. There's more work involved in it, and I like it. Shifting into the digital era, I had to learn. I still had to learn everything with Photoshop and everything else to arrive at where I did with a chemical print, let's say, in a chemical process. Similar type of intense, but a whole different way to arrive there.
Mm-hmm. What about filters? You like to use filters quite a bit?
Not always. I always try to just be like a straight photographer, you might say. You know, I didn't do really a lot of special effects. The only time I ever really did was using an infrared film, and of course with that, to get the kind of shots you want, you do have to use like a 25A or a deep red filter. But ultimately it's printed as a black and white. That's probably the only time I ever really did, other than just contrast filters or polarizers that you use over the lens just to get different contrast. But I was never really into like special effects type of photography. I wanted straight out, you know. In fact, I did a lot of full frame, you know, for a while, where you'd see that I on the carrier of the enlarger, you know, it had a little area where you put the negative and then it would, you know, project down. I filed a lot of that out because I wanted the edge of that film to be printed on the paper. And what I was trying to do there was I wanted, forcing myself to see everything full frame, right? So whatever this camera saw, that's what it was. Not that, oh, I like this, I'm going to crop this section out of there. This was it. And I had to shoot that to get, you know, what I wanted out of it. And that's what a lot of that was at that particular time, was even, you know, a challenge for me to make sure that I was aware of what was in this corner, that corner, that corner, you know. And photography, again, is that mathematical possibility. One little degree can change, you know, change the whole thing a lot of times. So you always had to be aware of that. That's the technical side of photographer, complete with everything else you're trying to do, right, you know, this way, and then everything else that's going on in front of you, right, you still have to be a technician, right, you know, ultimately. So yeah, it's, you know. And
you present them, I mean, the black frames, the white matting, very classic look to your presentation.
I always liked, well, again, I think a lot of what I was wanting to do was to put it in that realm of you know, fine art, you know, in a way, because I think that's where people kind of stop and really look into the window. People who appreciate those kind of things. And again, it's there, but it was kind of like a window, a nice dressed window. You know, it's just, okay, I'm stopping and looking at this. I wonder what happened before. I wonder what's going to happen afterward. It's just one little boom. And so I want to present that as good and clear and concise as I can, you know, to kind of pull people into that, the image, whatever it is, whatever it's about. Because that was the important thing to me, was what was going on there, you know.
You did an exhibit in 2003 called Native Fields, which, is it focused on your family? Is that kind of a play on words? And
actually it was, yes.
And how did you get the idea? What were some of the things that you shot for that?
Well, actually, it was a show at Paseo, I think, in Oklahoma City, okay, and it was a kind of a play on words. We actually had a website called Native Fields, and so we sort of just took it to call the show that. That's where myself and my son Yadika, who's a painter, and then Anita, her clay, we sort of had a joint show, and that's kind of how that evolved. Yeah, so we had it at a gallery down at Oklahoma City in the Paseo district, and you know, it's kind of interesting. It's always interesting to collaborate. You know, I mean, me and Anita have been artists all our lives, and so our son, my first son, he's a painter now. You know, and my other son, he's a musician. You know, he plays and he can do art. He's making this octopus right now for a performance by a band that they're going to do. Wow. It's kind of like a performance art, you know. But they've all been sort of raised in a very open and creative process. Like when my youngest son was growing up, we didn't give him a curfew. He actually didn't need one, and the reason why was because every other kid had one. So when they had to go in, he had to come home because that was his ride. So, you know, what else could he do? But, you know, you do have to let them do their thing. And they've been going to Santa Fe and art shows, you know, since they were babies. So they've been around art. They understand what it is in a way. Not just Santa Fe, but a lot of other places. And Yataka's learning the business of art, because it is a business when you get into the realm of being a professional artist. The business side of it, which is a whole different game by itself, So he's learning that, and so that's been good for them to grow up and see kind of this side of what art can, how art, that expression of art can actually be a career, and you can make a living on it, and not harm anyone, not hurt the earth, and make good friends with it and have a good time, That's good for them.
You've done quite a bit of teaching, both of photography and video. What do you try to pass on to students in those areas?
Yeah, I did summer schools and stuff and teaching. I teach it from the perspective of how I would have liked to have been taught. I try to keep it fun and interesting, because when you're working with young kids, if it didn't, they turn you off in a second. I think I remember my very first experience in front of a classroom. I think within 30 seconds of that moment, I'm thinking, what the heck did I get myself into? It was just like, but, I just applied the, what would I like, or what would I want to learn? And then, of course, if you're teaching video photography, I want them certainly technically to learn about the technique and the process. I don't start there, though. Actually, I start with a group of people by fun and games outside or something, doing something, exercising, getting to know each other. And that's what it's all about. Because I want them to understand human relations, at a young age, and how using and introducing a camera is part of that, And so I want them to feel comfortable being around each other. I also teach them how to sort of learn the language of photography, to talk about it. If I ask you this question, why did you take that picture? I want them to at least be able to explain to me why they took the picture. I don't want to hear, I don't know, because that's not a reason, you understand? It's part of that. The snap is just a small part of what photography is all about. After we sort of get into a lot of that, then we do a lot of shooting and then critiquing. Shooting and critiquing. That's what I did a lot of when I teach, is shooting and critiquing, because I really want them to see what they got, critique it in a positive manner, and then go do some more and critique again. So you sort of ultimately arrive experientially at kind of some place, somewhere that you're comfortable doing this. Now, it's a lot easier with digital photography, because you can use, project, PowerPoint and all that. And back in the black and white days, it was a little harder. We used to use a lot of slides back then, because you could take them out to the lab and get them back the next day. So it was easier teaching-wise to, project and see it immediately. If it was more than that, they'd probably get bored and go to a clay class or something. But I had to keep them interested and keep them, understanding what they were seeing. And most of them that were in my classes sort of wanted to be there. I mean, they wanted to learn some of that. I think this generation probably today has been photographed probably more than any. It started out like parents photographed them. But now they photograph themselves, There's a whole genre of pictures, I've taken my camera, me and my buddies. I mean, you could look on Flickr or anywhere and just see thousands, which are real interesting. I find they're real interesting, what they do. So the evolution of technology has made photography a whole, another kind of world than when I started with it. So I just teach interest in it, They'll figure out how to do what they want to do with it. Yeah.
Artists hardly ever retire, but they might retire from a paying job to do art full time. Do you have some plans to, when you do retire, to?
Actually, I do,
projects?
and I have a whole bunch of notebooks with negatives in there.
Cool.
Now, back in the old days, I would shoot and make a contact sheet, and maybe I may print one or two out of that. I have a lot of negatives that I've never printed anything from, just maybe made a contact sheet. So I have a really resource of things that I'd like to look at and maybe print some more, and maybe do another exhibit from different eras there, and see what I can get. Because now, what happens when I I've started scanning a lot of these negatives on a digital scanner, and once you get them into that form, then you take them just like you do digital photographs now, Photoshop, whatever you need to do, and then print on with a printer. But there's a lot that I have that I'm gonna really try to get into, and it's I've got a lot of negatives.
Sounds wonderful. Looking back over your career so far, what has been one of the high points?
Oh boy. I think the high point of my career is when I actually doing that church project. That was kind of an evolution, or any project that I would finish. I mean, that one I basically self-funded. And did it, completed it, had an exhibit. I mean, and that was satisfying. To have. And it's always satisfying, even just to make a good photograph that's been maybe seen somewhere or part of an exhibit, because in the scheme of things, you've created or shown people something they've never seen before. Those are interesting. I've had stuff in different publications, different exhibits. There's a photograph that I have in an exhibit coming out of the New Orleans Museum called The Art of Caring, and it was and they produced a book, but their premier photographer was they have a lot of very high-end photographers in this show, so I was very thrilled to be part of it. Things like that, things that where work is actually shown, actually produced, and I really like that, and again, my peer group is not native artists. It's photographers worldwide, international. I continually am just totally intrigued of the work that people are doing all over the world, and documenting communities and things that are going on, But then I look back at our own people here, To me, that's just important. And that's a lesson I learned a long time ago. People think, well, why are you taking pictures of just your family or people I says, well, National Geographic photographers over there taking pictures of the same people, I mean, and I know them better than him, So, it's part of the critique that even that early on, take pictures that your strengths are, and the strengths are people you care about. One of the probably most important things I think that I learned, part of this scenario that I do when I shoot is you have to have sort of an emotional commitment to your subject. That's why I try to get within that space where they are, because they have to see me as a person, and I mean, it works photographically, otherwise they shut down and they look like it. They don't share that interaction. And when I talk about sharing, I just mean that part of where they're acting naturally, they're doing what they would be doing normally, to the extent that there's a camera and a guy over here with it by them, and we talk about it before I start shooting, a little bit. But that's what that is. They feel comfortable enough to do what they do, and I always enjoy that piece of it, that part of it. So that's what I think is really I enjoy most, is that, even if it's a small moment, or even if it's something in the New Orleans Museum of Art. I mean, to me these are just as powerful as something over here. So.
Well, is there anything that, before we look at your work, that we've forgotten to talk about, or anything you'd like to add?
Boy, I'm not sure. Well, Well, I think that it's 2011. The craft, the art of photography has really just jumped leaps and bounds. When I started back in the 70s, I find it very interesting. Digital photography. I remember when that discussion was had, as film or digital, and for some reason it was kind of like a dilemma for some people. But it's all just a tool. I mean, ultimately the end product is that story.
Let's go ahead and take a look at your pictures.
This particular photograph was from a series on where I was back. I shot it actually back, I think, in the 70s, and there was always something in that you would see that stereotyped Native people all the time, and so this was a ride at the fair, and this little boy was in this little canoe going around this water here, and they had these Indians. I forget what they call it, frontier or something, but there's this Indian, in this typical pose with a tomahawk, and so I thought that was kind of so this kid right here, to me, this is what he's learning. This is his education right here is what Indian people are.
Right. Did you shoot this in another state? Was this in?
Actually, this was in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Oh, wow. I almost asked if it was at the Tulsa Fairgrounds.
And you'd be surprised. Kids this age, that's what they're learning.
Right, exactly.
And that's what they know.
Right.
This photograph was part of a larger project that I did on photographing all the head starts at Cherokee Nation. There are 14 counties in eastern Oklahoma, all the way up to Kansas, or Delaware County up north, all the way down to Arkansas and almost over to Tulsa. And so in different head starts, they would have graduations. So this was a Lost City head start. And so this was a little boy who was graduating, and of course his grandmother and mother and sister were in that frame. So I just thought it sort of said a lot of things right there. I always liked it.
Really, lots of emotion in there. Wonderful piece. Want to tell us about this one?
Well, this is part of the series that I was doing on Indian churches. This actually was a Cherokee church in Lone Prairie, which is around little Kansas, Oklahoma. This particular church has a lot of personal meaning because my relatives went to church here. I went to church there when I was very little. My grandmother, great-grandmother, and great-great-grandmother went there. So I think it was started in 1876.
It's beautiful.
But of course, this is not the same building, but
Right.
I shot it with infrared film because I wanted a real dramatic effect out of it.
Yeah.
So that's one reason it sort of has that look.
Right.
This was a photograph I took inside of Creek Church. I did a whole series project on Creek churches and the people and the communities there. And this particular church is sort of one of the older types where the men sit on one side and the women sit on the other side. And one thing that is very familiar, certainly with even traditional churches, the doorways always faced east because they always said, Christ will come from the east when he returns back to earth, which is a very similar concept to a lot of old traditional beliefs. Even in sunrise ceremonies, the Creator comes from the east. So I think you see in a lot of traditional churches, even some of the old traditional types of beliefs that have sort of evolved over the years since then. This is at a church called Alabama Quasarty, east of Wetumpka, Oklahoma, about 6 miles. It's a very small one. So that's basically how it is. It works. There's a bench here, and certainly when they have the altar call, they'll go up there. But they're singing right now, and so this is part of that. There's a very distinct order that people set. Like the first lady sits here, the elders, and then it sort of goes on that way. The same goes for the men, and the preachers will sit in the back. So there's a very structure to how they do what they do. And the thing about why I was wanting to photograph some of this in this project is to learn some of that and photographically kind of capture some of that. I know a lot of younger Creek people that are in churches don't understand that element of it. You know, they'll do things, but they don't know why. You know, why do you do that? And they don't know that. So they're even in these communities, as generations, elders pass on, you know, they still don't know a lot. The younger people don't understand a lot of it. So I just wanted to sort of do a photo project that would at least bring importance or bring out what they do, in hopes that maybe some younger people will start wanting to learn more about why, you know, and who, and all that. So that's what this particular shot was. But it's a larger series.
Yes.
This picture was taken in a camp house at that same church that same day. After services, let's say Sunday services, everyone will eat at a camp house. Typical Creek traditional grounds is sort of a church in the middle, and then different family camp houses around it. Much similar to a tribal grounds somewhere, a tribal town, similar situation. When these churches were established a long time ago, people had to arrive either by covered wagons, so you'd stay there for an extended amount of time, and were fed there in these houses. So all the guests will be fed in those houses. So usually right before lunch, the deacons come and tell you what number to go to, which camp house, and they sort of divvy up everybody. And so we were in this camp house, and they were having a full meal, and I just sort of liked the scene that was going on there with the tapestry of the Last Supper there,
Yes.
and then the minister here, and then people eating.
Really nice.
Which is a
photograph.
common theme in any culture, is
Yes.
sharing a meal.
Yes.
So I just sort of liked that. So
All right.
this photograph was taken at a Creek tribal town, Hilubi. It was actually on a Friday when ribbon dance was going on during green corn, and hadn't really well, it had started, and so this young lady's getting her little sister ready, combing her hair, getting her ready to dance. And I like to shoot things of that nature. To me, the action, the circle of action is extended out further by what people are doing around. A lot of times people maybe think this is just what's going on, but I like what's going on all around. So that's why I framed it like I did, and I shot it with infrared film to give me more of a real kind of an intense, surrealistic look. Again, technique and strategy, you might say.
Right.
I always
Okay.
have people in my photographs usually.
It's got some great textures and shades there,
Yeah.
tones.
Uh-huh.
All
So that was
right.
basically that.
Well, thank you very much for your time today, Tom. I enjoyed
We
talking
got
with
more.
you.
No, just kidding.